Okay, more afternoon, everyone. Almost I said morning. Clearly the day has been very long. I'm Advocate Elizabeth Nieuwoudt. I'm the Head of Office at the Tembisa local office, and today we're going to look a little bit at Section 28 of the Bill of Rights about the rights of children. We are in Human Rights Month, so we thought we'll focus a little bit on just the rights of children. There is a live broadcast, so you can more than welcome to leave comments below, and we will answer them as we go along. Okay, so as I said, we'll talk about Section 28, and you will ask me Section 28 of what? So Section 28 of the Constitution that deals with every right or the rights of children specifically. So I think the most important one, and it's also actually the first one on the list, is a child has a right to a name and a nationality. Now you would think, okay, but that's, sure, that's a name, and everybody has a name, but unfortunately, that name must be registered, because with that registration comes a birth certificate, and that birth certificate is so important because that's the basis of your identity document later in life. And I think we all know without the identity document you can try to open a bank account, you can try to go to school, there's lots of places that is not going to allow you access to services if you don't have a birth certificate. So maybe this request is more to the parents than the children. And that one basic thing, if I can ask you, that one thing you can do when your child is born is register the birth. And I understand that Department of Home Affairs, the lines are long and it's frustrating, and maybe they're not as friendly as they should be. But really, that's the one thing you can do for your child, is just register the birth. There's a big problem with children that we call stateless, that do not belong. And I think one can just realize how absolutely horrible that must be, is that if you don't have a birth certificate, very important, the name and nationality. And that also links to South Africa is signatories to conventions. So the African Convention on the Rights of Children and also the UN Convention, and even in those two conventions there's a right to a nationality and a right to a name. So it's not only our constitution or appropriate alternative care. So maybe alternative care is where a child would be removed from parental care because of abuse, neglect, then they would be placed in alternative care. So that is a guarantee. So, and that's where the children's courts play a role, is to there's a process. We can't just place you with anyone. Alternative care has a specific meaning. So that will be your foster care, your placement in children's homes. Those are all seen as alternative care. So that is where legal aid plays a role in terms of representing those children that goes through the system that is placed in alternative care. So a little bit of a watchdog maybe role of what legal aid will have in those processes to make sure that children are placed in registered alternative care, because unfortunately there's lots of horror stories that children are just placed with people that are not screened. So we don't know if the place that they are placed or registered is suitable for children. So you will have there is stories of a few years ago of children dying in places of safety, and and unfortunately the investigation then comes afterwards, after the child has died. Then they go and see, well, was the place registered? So that's part of our role as legal aid and legal representatives of children, is to make sure that the Children's Court and the Department of Social Development comply with their statutory duties to make sure that those places are registered, and that's also where we play a role. And it linked to that is the further section in 28 that says a child is entitled to legal representation at state expense if a substantial injustice will otherwise occur. So those are a lot of big words, but so basically state expense, there's case law that says that is legal aid. That is our job, state expense for children, because if you really think about it, how is a child going to pay for a lawyer? They can't. So that's uniquely our role to provide that legal representation at state expense. A good few years ago, time has flown, there was also a judgment by the High Court that says that, and in that case, a child actually phoned Childline, and she, out of her own, said, my parents are going through this horrendous divorce. I cannot bear with it anymore. Somebody must help me. And then if you look at it, are we now going to say to that child, oh no, no, you must pay for somebody to represent you? If that child was so desperate to call Childline, and that is why the Constitution says that child is then a child. Surely, if the child is so unhappy, that is the substantial injustice. And then to say, okay, but then legal aid is in the unique position to help the children. And I mean, that's the one example, but also just children. If you look at Section 28, it's also children are entitled to basic health care and social services. Again, I'm sure, if I can ask around, if there was other people in the room with me, there were a lot of people that can tell horror stories of children turned away from a school, from a clinic, from a Department of Social Development because of a lack of documents or a lack of maybe just knowledge. But the Constitution says that they are entitled to basic healthcare services, basic social services. And again, this is where legal aid plays a role in terms of our mandate, because our mandate is to protect the vulnerable, and that includes the minor children, and making sure that they get basic healthcare and education. I think, and from my own experience, that is the biggest problem is the education. Although Section 28 doesn't mention education, it's one of the other subsections. It's included, a child has a right to basic education. And again, children are turned away. We're talking about the lack of birth certificates. And a while ago, luckily, I think, hopefully, most of the schools have stopped. But a lot of the schools would say, if you come with, I want to enroll my child, they will say, okay, where's the birth certificate? And if that parent cannot give a birth certificate, then they will say, no, we can't enroll your child. But that goes against what Section 28 and 29 of the of the Constitution says. But then also the role, what then? Can we go to court? Yes, because the Children's Act then says that the Children's Court can call somebody, any state institution that is there to deliver a statutory duty, to call upon them to say, hey, why are you not allowing this child into a school or into a clinic? Again, that is a role that legal aid can fulfill, to if we know about these children, to help them to get access to these services, and the Children's Court can help with that. The Section 28 also says that you're entitled to protection from maltreatment, abuse and degradation. Again, this is where the Children's Court, and if you read these sections together with the Children's Act, where legal aid then also makes sure that when the children goes through this process and through the courts, that their rights are protected. Just prior or earlier today, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she was representing two children that were sexually assaulted by their father, and their case took 7 years to be finalized before he was sentenced. And a part of our role would be to make sure that in those 7 years, unfortunately we can't always push a criminal court case, but we can at least make sure that in the process that the children need to testify and things like that, that they are treated fairly, that the policemen somewhere don't give up, or the court don't give up, that they go. Because for 7 years, unfortunately, as it stands now, children are not allowed to go for therapy while they still have to testify. So it's really then to say, well, we protect the children in that process, to at least try to get them to be okay at the end of the prosecution. And it's again, it's a weighing up of rights. If you look at Section 28, it actually says that the best interests of minor children are paramount. But there's a lot of case law that says that paramountcy principle doesn't mean I'm erasing other people's rights. If I'm coming over, if if it makes sense. Yes, so it's paramount, but it doesn't just cancel other people's rights. And in terms of the criminal procedure and the prosecution, sometimes people, you sit with the rights of the accused, also in terms of the Constitution, but then you also sit with the rights of the child, also in terms of the Constitution. So how do you weigh up those two principles and those rights against each other? But if you look at the Constitution, it says paramount. And if you look at, there's a lot of discussions, but what is paramount? So I always say if you look at paramountcy, is almost like a king or a queen, that ultimate right. So if there's an author of, one of the authors of the commentary on the Children's Act, she talks about that the best interest would have the casting vote. And for me, that's such a nice picture to say that if you have these rights of a parent, the rights of an accused, the rights of society, and all those kind of things, how do you decide which right is the most important? And then if you go to section